Yeah. So let's bring some of these pieces back, right? You have marketing. We had talked about finance,
hmm
and finance and marketing without ethics, neither one of those are going to operate correctly either.
Aloha, and welcome to another episode of the Groundswell Origins podcast, where I connect you to outstanding humans and sustainable ideas. I'm your host, Scott Martin. Today we have Chris Young. He is an author, a professor, but he's a top expert in the fucking world around valuation. He's been working on massive cases. He's now consulting to small, mid-sized businesses, that really want to understand valuation and get the most value from it. And as well as he's been speaking and teaching around business ethics. And what we've done is we kind of brought together business valuation and brand, and he's got such an easy way of sort of breaking it down and giving you some visibility, really understanding why you actually what you're building, the brand you're building, and can you actually do an ROI or create a business valuation around brand. So tune in, listen to this, and hear what he's got to say. And so without further ado, let's paddle in. All right, welcome to the show, Chris Young.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Good to see you again.
Same here, buddy.
um, it was great seeing you in Dallas at Tony Robbins UPW, and we had a really engaging conversation about two topics that we're going to jump into: business ethics and business valuation. And I want to start the conversation right away with give us a little background. You have a really impressive background in teaching, understanding, and working with on a variety of different levels on helping understand business valuation and these topics. Can you share that?
Yeah, of course, of course. So, Scott, my background, I have a PhD, focused on international financial management and political economics. Um, been working in and around small businesses, large businesses, valuation, financial markets my entire life. Um, wore a lot of hats: CFO hat, wore hat as an investment banker, wore hat as a private equity investor, um, startup entrepreneur, and most recently as a financial consultant. Um, outside of that, right? Outside of my background, I love to write. I love to consult on valuation. Um, I work with some of the best companies, some of the most incredible entrepreneurs in the country on helping them maximize growth, help them maximize value.
And didn't you teach at Chet University as
Oh yeah,
well?
yeah, for sure. I forgot. Right. I taught at two universities. I started my career in academics at Seton Hall University, where I taught primarily finance economics. And most recently, for the last 10 years or so, I was at Rutgers University, Rutgers School of Business, where I focused primarily on business ethics.
Beautiful. And then the one thing that would be cool to just like maybe touch in on, because I think it shapes a little bit of some of the conversation of how you think, is you also have a background in the military.
I do, and I'm still in the military, that's for sure.
Yeah. What's that?
So, my military background, I started out a very young man out of high school, and I joined the military. I was with Special Forces for a bunch of years. Um, After 9/11, I went back into something called civil affairs. And just recently, I went back in once again as. Are you familiar with the Monuments Men movie? The movie The Monuments
I've
Men?
heard of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the Monuments Men were a group of soldiers, group of enlisted officers in World War II who were tasked with the primary function of collecting Jewish artwork from the Nazis, finding it, collecting it, restoring it, and giving it back to the Jewish population. And so, probably, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, the United States Army reignited that group. And I was selected for that group about a year and a half ago. And I've been back in the military ever since as a civil affairs economics officer.
Amazing. And I remember that you and I were talking about you have I can't remember if it's a blog or podcast called Ordinary Savages. You still have that?
I,
I love that name, by the way.
I do, but I haven't used it. It's on the top of my list of things I have to get done. I love word. Trust me when I tell you, it's absolutely a passion of mine. Interviewing people who are just ordinary folks who have savage capability, savage action. They accomplish incredible things. So At some point in the future, that will get reignited.
Well, I think this episode should be called "Extraordinary Savage" for valuations or something, because that's how I view you. You're this like savage individual that just seems so easygoing, and you got so much like depth of knowledge. Let's just talk a little bit about evaluation of business for someone that doesn't really understand what that is. How do you kind of simplify and explain the importance and maybe the framework around what is a business valuation?
Excellent way to start. So, a business valuation is simply what is the value of a company. And when we say valuation as a subject, what we're really doing is valuing all types of things. You can value intellectual property, you can value a small corporation, you can value cars, you can value homes, right? You could value everything. So, a valuation exercise related to business is how can we think through and come up with a valuation that makes absolutely good sense, right? That's supported. And so that's really what I've been focused on for the past many years. And the reason I am so hyper focused on valuation is because I work with so many entrepreneurs who choose to start a business. Um, this business is wonderful. It's fun. They get excited, but 10 years down the road, there's no value associated with it, and they can't sell it. And so I really got into valuation many years ago when I owned my own small business. I was 20 years old. I was going to sell the business. I had no idea what it was going to be worth. And so what did I do? I went to the library at that time. There was not library. I went to the bookstore, if you remember, like Barnes and Nobles and all those other bookstores. And I picked up about 5 or 6 books on valuation. I had no idea what I was reading. And I tried my best to infuse all that information, and I put together my first valuation. I was probably 24, I guess. Yeah, 24, 25 years old. And so that's my passion. My passion is helping small businesses and investors think through what is a value, what is the proper value of a company, how can we make money on it, how can we sell a company, so that the entrepreneurs who put their entire life's work into a business can monetize that business. I mean,
Right, and you don't just work with small business. At least in the past, I mean, I've heard that you've been involved with a mutual contact who's in a law firm in $100 million cases. Am I correct?
yeah. So
So
yeah, of course. The thing is, my passion is the small business owner who has been operating a business for 20 years. They have a $15 million revenue base, and they want to sell, or they want to gift it to their children. All of those exercise need a valuation,
mhm.
and so that's what that gets me jazzed up. I like to see people's success, or I should say, their hard work, be monetized in a way where they feel as though everything that they did was actually worth it financially. And unfortunately,
So
there's too many entrepreneurs who miss that boat. They don't pay enough attention to it.
yeah, and so what are some of the attributes or signals that are really power signals for better valuation that may be not obvious? The one that comes to mind to me is, you like take two businesses with the same revenue, one subscription versus one is intermittent, a non-contractual. I mean, the valuation is not even the same ballpark.
Not even in the same ballpark. Yeah, so there's without question variables that are sort of known to people. Obviously, more revenue, normally bigger value. More profit, bigger value. Just all things equal, just assume that to be the case, right? Revenue up, revenue increases, profits increase, value increases, almost always. The things people miss is the business model. That's what you were alluding to there. The business model is it's a repeat business. It's a subscription based. Um, Yes, that's gonna command a higher value, mainly because it's much easier to forecast. Right? Think about it
Hmm.
if for yourself. If you were to buy a business, wouldn't you want to know with relative or reasonable certainty what the revenue is going to be next year? And so on a subscription model, it's pretty easy to do that. Or I should say, it's easier. Nothing's easy in the valuation community, but it's easier to do that. Um, what are some of the other ones that are really important? Thinking through how many competitors are in the market. Are there two competitors, or is there 2,000 competitors? Obviously,
Oh, so that's an external. That's a external attribute of purchasing. It's not based on business performance. It's like actual. That's actually based on the landscape. That actually changes the valuation. I didn't even think of that.
yes, a lot of external components change the valuation. You got to think about it this way: why does it change the valuation, right? Why, if I have a business and um, there's 2,000 competitors, what does that do to my business? Well, most likely it's going to decrease price, right? Because now I have options, and so the more options I have, the consumers are now in control. They have the ability to choose. And what happens to the suppliers or the business owners? They normally drop price in order to meet the demands. So obviously, that's an external constraint.
Well, what if it was too specialized? Like if you think of, I'm working with a company right now that helping them with their increase their valuation. They're in the medical veterinary. There's a lot of competitors in that, but they stand to gain quite a bit, and it's because there's like their buyer is looking at rolling up multiple in that category or
Mhm.
something. They're a private equity firm. So is there like, can you get too specialized where it's like there's not enough interest, or is there like a pendulum on that, or is it just like less competitors the better?
No, no, for sure. You can um, uh, customize yourself right out of the marketplace. I was
Right.
working with a company that was making some very rare, extremely rare parts for airplanes, and they were the only ones that were making it. They didn't make anything else. That was it. So, and being a rare product, um, and it being a niche product, and being that there's only a few airplane companies in the world that would buy it, it limited their market size. So they were always thinking, well, how can we can't grow? I said, well, you got to build something that's a little bit more commoditized, right? So think about it, a product, extremely commoditized product, a pen or a pencil, very, very limited opportunity to make lots of profits. Then if you go to the far end, if it's too unique, there's not enough buyers. You can get a high
Hmm.
price, they can get probably a really high price, but you're not going to get enough buyers. And therefore, somewhere in between is where you want to be.
Now, what about multiple revenue streams? Does there is that make it more resilient, or does it make it diffractured in
Yeah.
terms of energy? Like, what is your thinking around that? Like, how does that look affect valuation?
Brilliant, right? So there's a debatable, and this has been going on forever. Um, Dr. Michael Porter, Harvard University, about 25 years ago, uh, spent a lot of time talking about what makes more sense: a diversified business with lots of products, or one with only one product. And I'll tell you where I fall on this. Dr. Porter and I agree. I think it's only one product or two products, right? Think about all of the unicorns that we've seen in the last 20 years, right? All of them, from Facebook to Tesla to Uber, right? All of the unicorns focus on one product, and they did it really well. And so I'm under the belief that let's put all of our eggs in one product. Let's try to build that product as best we possibly can and see how we do. The reason I don't like multiple products, at least in an early stage company, maybe later, Scott, but in an early stage company, I'm not a big fan. Um, it's okay to start diversifying as the company gets larger. And the reason that starts to happen is because the growth opportunities are lower. Right? If you were to think about like a window, an open window, right? Or think about a company when they first start out. They have the ability to grow at hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of percents in the first couple of years. And then what starts to happen over a period of time, the growth slows, right? Till they get so large, and they're at CPI or 3% a year thereafter, right? That company's not going to grow anymore. But if you want to protect that revenue and you want to protect that profit, it's at that point in time you start to diversify. But young companies, I would argue, do not diversify. I see a lot with really smart, aggressive sales executives, like, like a historical salesperson who started a business. They never want to miss their goal, and so what do? They're coming close to missing their goal, and they go buy something, and it's not the same product. It's totally different. You would almost look at it as irrelevant. right? I'm working on a valuation right now, and it's a company that distributes oil globally, right? That's what they do. They distribute oil. And then I looked at their portfolio and it had a landscaping business in there, which what is that? And then some they had a line of convenience stores. What is this about?
No, it reminds me of is a grandma's quilted blanket. None of it makes sense, but they've just sewn it together.
Yeah,
At least on that description,
they were
yeah,
very entrepreneurial. They were very
yeah,
opportunistic. They saw this enormous landscaping business in their local area and they bought it. But what happens is it took their eye off the ball.
right.
Right? It'd be very, very.
Fractured. Well, in that case, I mean, that one's, I feel like that's a kind of a fairly obvious one because it's like there's nothing correlated with it.
Mhm.
So the uncorrelated revenue that maybe someone would say, well, that means that they're safe one from the other, but you're not able to like double down on resources except for maybe a centralized administration, which is a pretty rough argument anyways. But what about like when you're describing starting with one product, I think of like Amazon, the beachhead strategy, the military strategy of beachhead strategy, right? Like they started with books,
Yeah.
and then they did the next correlation with correlated but similar that they used the same thinking around themes, which was CDs, and then they kind of expanded from there. Now they are from A to Z, and the famous sort of like explanation is the Grand Canyon was built by a very narrow river. Go narrow first, right? Get deep. So, I mean, I actually I love that. But what about if you're you're a single type of product, but you have multiple ways that you receive revenue from it.
Mhm.
So, like, I think a lot of small businesses are trying to figure out, let's say, consulting. So, we'll take me for example. Like, I do consulting, but now I have a community where I'm getting revenue from subscriptions
Yeah.
and my subscribers.
Mhm.
I got yet another revenue stream, which is training.
Yeah.
Every one of them overlaps with the other. The branding strategy I do with my consulting clients are great case studies I do into training courses, and then I coach people how to be certified to do what I do. So it's kind of there, but I have multiple revenue streams, and they come in different forms.
Right.
Is that like where does it sit? Where does that sit with you? Like when you think of it from that perspective,
Yeah.
is that the same product or is that different
Well,
products?
I think that what you're doing is an extension of a product.
Okay,
You are the product, right? What you have up here is your product, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to leverage that product, right? In so many ways, right? And so it's really you, and we're trying to figure out how can we get more from Scott, and so we create, your second or your
yeah.
third consulting products or your online classes and your books. That's what that's doing. It's literally taking you and it's making you multiple entities.
So am I able to see no Scott, no business, right?
No
So
Scott, no
it's
business.
like the dancing bear. So I can't get much of a valuation for that,
Probably not yet, right? But
right?
what's good about what you're doing, Scott, which I really enjoy, is we don't call it Scott Martin marketing, or it's not Scott Martin this, right?
Yeah, it's Groundswell.
Right? It's Groundswell, and Groundswell is the brand. And as
Yeah,
you continue to build this out, Groundswell is only going to get larger. And you start to bring on team members. They're not working. I mean, yes, okay, fine. Scott's my boss, right? But they're not working for Scott, the um, the intellectual property of the company. Although you probably are still associated with it, they believe they're associating themselves with something bigger, right? Groundswell. And that's why I always get so upset when I see people create businesses and then name it after themselves,
right.
right?
You segued this perfectly because I was going to ask, where does brand? So there's business performance and brand value. Where does brand value actually come into play for
Yeah,
valuation?
yeah. Like think about the legal community now, which I only found this out a few years ago. I'd never put it together. Lawyers, legal firms have to be named after the partners.
Oh, I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
so that's one, and accounting firms used to be the same. I think they changed that law probably in the last 10 or 15 years. Don't hold me to that. But yeah, that's the reason why law firms are named after one, two, five or six different partners because it's a requirement, right? And by the way, that is always going to be, at least the way I see the world, that'll probably always be a personal intellectual property play, right? So
You mean talk law firm, like selling your law
a law
firm?
firm, yeah.
Oh, I thought you'd be selling like the book of business because I mean they have contracts like anyone else, don't they?
You do have a book of business, but that book of business doesn't have to go with the new buyer, right?
Right.
So if it's not properly moved, there's not a lot of training to move those clients from one law firm to the next. What happens? The buyer loses all those clients, right? And therefore the value you probably overpaid for it.
Right.
Let me give you one that is so near and dear to me. Think about a dentist, okay, a dental practice. Now, I'll give you a fact. The dentists work longer than any other professional. They work to 70, 73, 74, sometimes 80 years old. And you know why they do that? Because dental practices are valued at an extremely low figure. And why is that? Because normally you go to a dentist to see the dentist. That dentist has been working in your mouth pretty closely. They are in your personal space, right, for 10, 15, 20, maybe even 30 years. And now you go to a new dentist and you don't like the way the dentist hits your gums. You don't like the way the dentist moves your face. And so what do? You leave. And so what happens in a dental practice is there's a lot of what we call attrition. From the time I buy the practice to about 4 or 5 years later, I'm going to lose anywhere between 20 and 50% of the business, mainly because I just don't like the new dentist. Does that make sense?
It does. So let's talk about the dentist
Yeah.
then. So, what if you were going to advise a dentist to what could they do to increase their valuation, either like lines of business, like maybe it's aesthetic dentistry, or have a line of products or something. Like, what could they do to gamify their the position? And I'm thinking about not the single dentist. I'm thinking about the dentist that has a multi disciplinary clinics. Like they have they have an orthodontist, they might have another dentist. So they're kind of moving beyond themselves.
Yeah.
Like they're not the sole opener. What would you advise them? What would be some ideas around that?
Have lots of people. Have your clients see multiple dentists, right? Not just one dentist, if you can. So this time around, you're getting a cleaning done by this particular nurse or this particular technician. Next time, it's going to be this technician. You have to get your teeth drilled this time around. You're going to see Dr. Scott Martin. Next time, you're going to see Dr. Chris Young. The next time, you're going to see somebody else. If you can pull that off, I actually work with a dental practice down in Miami who's pretty successful at that. But they start that with with their youngest patients, really young children. They have a child dentistry practice, and then they also
Hmm.
have an adult. And so you have some of these young kids who are now 30, 40 years old are still at the same exact dental practice, and they see everybody. Get me in anytime you possibly can. I'll see whatever dentist is available. Right, and they've done that phenomenally. And that dental practice is going to trade for a premium.
Really, that's a very interesting insight on that. What if, like if you're say so you have multiple dentists and you have now multiple offices, what about between offices? So say someone's got a trading circle of the city of Calgary, and they currently got a couple offices. I'm actually thinking of somebody, and their valuation of, is there a scale of having multiple offices that then is more attractive to be bought? I mean, in terms of as a group or individually, like when you're thinking evaluation, is there a scale of having multiple offices being more power, more value?
So what you get, think about it as it's a diversification. So instead of diversification of product, you have a diversification of location,
Location, yeah.
right? So it does something similar. But again, if I was a startup law firm, um, I'm not going to have 5 offices in the first couple of years. I'm
Hmm.
going to build one practice. I'm going to get sort of saturated in that marketplace before I move on to another one. So you got to be very careful between. I'm not a big, as I mentioned, I'm not a big fan of diversification for young companies.
So do you have like a breakdown of, like, here's the simple way of looking at the things that you want to pay attention to either increase or be aware of the value of your company? We talked about, there's probably, is there like things like, well, you got cash flow, but is it like, receivables under 30 days or
Yeah,
consistently over 5 years?
yeah,
Like, what are some of those things that my dad was a business broker, so I have some familiarity with this, as you
yeah,
can tell. So I'm just like, but I'm curious to kind of, maybe you give me
Mhm.
your breakdown.
Yeah. Let's start with the highest level. Key persons, right? If you have one person that brings in all the business, that's what we refer to as a key person. And if that person were to unfortunately pass away, or they were to leave, they're going to do something else, how much of the business is going to walk out the door? Right. So in the beginning, you're going to have key persons. You're the key person at your company, right? Without you, the company doesn't exist. Okay. So you're a key person. Somebody that would potentially buy you, they're going to be so worried that if Scott leaves, the business goes to zero, right? So that's number one. You always want to have multiple top talent. So you got to pay attention to your talent. As you grow, you have to make sure that there's not just one top salesperson. You have to make sure that there's 3 or 4 or 5 top salespeople. You have to make sure that if you're in the technology sector, that you have more than one top programmer that knows everything. You have to pay very, very close attention to your succession plans, right? And so one of the things that I'm doing when we're valuing companies is I'm looking and I ask the question, who's going to succeed the CEO? Who succeeds the CFO? Who succeeds the COO, et cetera, right? And if they don't have a succession plan in place, then they're going to get a discount. If they have a succession plan in place, and assuming they're large enough for a succession planning, assuming they're large enough to have, hundreds of employees, then yes, I am going to expect them to have a succession plan in place. And if they don't, I'm going to give them a discount. So that's probably my number one. Number two is client concentration risk. And client concentration risk is, what if I'm doing $100 million and I only have one client? Right? One client, 100 million. I buy your business and that client cancels. Well, there goes. The whole business is gone. Right? So we want to make sure we don't have a ton of client cancellation risk. Right? You heard the 80-20 adage before. 80% of my business comes from the top 20 clients. And that's about standard across the board. Many, many companies is very similar. Now, if I can get better than 80-20, maybe I'm getting, 60-40, right? 60% of my revenue comes from 40% of my business, or, even better yet, let's say I'm selling things where there's no one customer that, has a substantial portion of my overall sales. That's the best. That's the greatest place to be, right? There's your subscription model. There's your, the seller of, probably like Zoom subscriptions or something like that. There's lots of small buyers, right? And when I have lots of small buyers, and if 1 or 2 leave or even 100 leave, it's not going to impact the business all that much, right? So that's number two. The same as it relates for concentration of suppliers. What happens if I'm making something and all of that something is being made by the same manufacturer, right? In some country, foreign country, even here in the United States, doesn't matter. But I have one supplier that's providing me everything, and that supplier, something happens. Boom, business, we're out of business, right? So obviously, first one, my top one, key person, discount. Second one is client concentration risk. Third one is supplier concentration. Fourth one is external, which is market share. How many competitors are there? If a market is made up of too many competitors, I get worried. If a market's made up of too little competitors and it starts to move towards a monopoly, I'm closer to that monopoly than not. Right? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Unless it's specialized, then it's like on its own.
Yeah. And so this brings me to my secondary area, which is what does the financial systems look like? Is everything buttoned up? Do they have financial statements that I can look at and I can get very comfortable with? Can I produce them on instantly, or does it take 6 years to get some financial statements? And I mean that seriously. Think about it this way. And I was working with a company most recently, and I asked them for their financials, and they said it's going to take us a while to get them to you. I said, okay, well, send it to me tomorrow or the next day. They said, no, it's going to take a couple of weeks. That's because their financial systems were in absolute disastrous place. That's going to clearly hurt their valuation.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're not measuring. You don't have like close measurement on understanding of you. Like you don't even know what you're flying if you're flying blind.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So when you're talking about financial system, it's funny because one of the things that, and maybe this, I don't know if this you've come up to this. I'm just curious, but because we work in a similar space where I'm helping people create a higher valuation based on revenue, diversifying their income, all these things that we've been talking about. And the one thing I've been really leaning into heavily is programs, basically marketing systems. So you were talking about, hey, make sure you got the top executives. I would argue you need to have a marketing system for bringing in new executives, or how we actually systemize leads, how we actually create programs that we're grooming customers and it's not reliant on sales. It's not reliant on humans, but we have systems in place that kind of like and marketing systems. They also bring down the cost of marketing. That's my book is about
Yeah.
how do you actually less economic waste,
Yeah.
less energy over time. How do you create that? But that longer play on the short term, it affects cash flow usually because it's like it's not like the quick, easy. Let's just go make sales, and it's like the up and down. But long term, my belief has always been that that'll create a higher valuation.
Mhm.
What is your response to that?
I agree. I agree with you.
Okay.
Um, I'm working with a firm now, very, very strong firm. And we keep going back and forth because this firm, I believe, has extraordinary sales front end systems from lead gen to who's going to pick up the lead, who's going to close the sale, who's going to book the sale, who's going to follow on, who's going to have follow on conversations for upsells. So they're doing that phenomenally, but their back end system is a disaster, right? So that company, although they can sell incredibly, there's a lot of leakage on the back end, right? And that,
They can't scale.
well, it's not even that they can't scale. I don't think that's their problem. I think because the marketing scales, the financial systems are not put in place. Like there's no budget, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you know how much profit you're going to have at the end of the year? And by the way, this is probably top 5 common mistakes for business owners is they don't have a budget. And I say budget, I don't mean just expenses. I'm talking about forecasting revenue. So at the end,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's paramount for a business owner. I don't care if you're a 1-person shop or you're a 10 million person shop. At the end of every month, when you close your books, your accountant gets done, compare your budget to your actuals, and say to yourself, "I thought I was going to make 100,000. I only made 2,000. Well, why?" Right? If you can't measure, if you can't track it, you can't more. What's the expression? If I can't measure it, I can't track it, right? And so that's what I need to do. I need to be able to measure stuff on the financial side, which also means lean generation. So that's like for me, very, very important on the financial system. First thing I ask is, do you have a budget? Do you have a forecast? Do you have a pro forma? And if they say no, instantly, I lose excitement.
Right.
Instantly, because I know they're probably not maximizing their potential.
Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I can totally see how, having a company that's like has some intimacy with gauging because there's tell me this if this is true. My experience has been whenever I come in and they describe I'm talking to the CEO or the founder, and they're like wildly
Yeah.
optimistic, and they are almost like over optimistic in and they underestimate the actual cost of sale, and they're not actually attributing the true cost of sale, which is they're only attributing like the what's visible. Example would be, oh, we've got a salesperson going making sales. That's our cost of sale. But I'm like, how much money are you spending supporting that person in the back end? Oh, you got like, all these little hidden costs that kind of add up, and that's sort of like this death by paper cuts and expenses. Like, is that what you're referring to in terms of financial visibility as well? Or?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like for instance, if this company that I'm talking about, if I were to ask anyone in the company, what's your number one expense? They don't know, but it's clear. It's crystal clear. But crystal clear to people who know what they're looking for. It's people. What's your
Hmm.
second largest? It's technology. What's your third? It's real estate. What's your fourth? Right? And so if you don't know these basic things, how can I start to question, your return on marketing? If you're not answering the easy questions, I'm definitely not going to ask you, what's your return on marketing last year? How'd you do on those Facebook ads? How'd you do on those podcasts? How did you do on this? That's why and I know you're awesome at this, Scott. You're creating for your companies a marketing platform. You're becoming a triple A platform, right? You're building out marketing systems and sales systems. And if that's not matched on the back end with real financial horsepower, that company could be wasting a lot of money. They can be maximizing sales, but they're not maximizing profit. And
Mm.
what do we want to do? We want to put more money in our pocket, right? And if you say, Chris, I don't really care about maximizing money in my pocket, you do one of two things. You got a lifestyle business or you're a nonprofit, right? What's the goal? The goal is for us to put more money in our pocket every year. Does that mean you have to spend it on yourself? No. If you want to go use it and give it away, go for it. But why put all of the effort on the sales and the marketing side if we're not going to then turn around and maximize profit? And I see it everywhere. The leakages are just incredible when I'm looking at valuations.
Oh, it's funny to say that because usually everyone comes to me and goes, "I want more leads." They're going more sales, and the first question I ask is, "Why are people leaving?" That's the leakage. Why are they actually like? Because every dollar you bring in, if we haven't figured out the plug-in holes, I mean that's going to cost you more. Like every dollar you save in figuring that out, in the bottom line, can have exponential impacts on your sales on the top line. Otherwise you're just on a treadmill.
Yeah. Yes.
You know.
Yes. But let's play that through, right? Because this is symbiotic. You got Scott Martin on the lead side. You're killing it. You're bringing in all this business, and then you have me on the finance side, and I'm maximizing your profits. Well, now what do I do with those profits? Well, we had a complaint last year. Our billing systems aren't working so well. Okay, well now I got all this extra profit. Let's make a little bit of an investment there. We just fixed it. What just happened to sales? They just went up. What happened to turnaround, or to, I should say, cancel rates? They decreased. Right now it gives me even more profit. Then turn around again and say, okay, Scott, well, what do you want to do next year? Well, we're going to launch this new product, or we're going to launch this new marketing platform. Okay, well, we got the money here. Right? If you don't have both systems operating beautifully together, and let's say I have an A system on the marketing side, but I got a D system on the finance side, disastrous. If I have an A system in the finance side and I have a D system in marketing side, no growth. Heavy-handed business, right? Run by militants with no growth, right? So the thing, it has to be balanced. I need
Mhm.
really aggressive salespeople, and I also need really smart, critical thinking finance people. And when they balance each other out, that's where the beauty is.
You know what comes to mind when you say this, and I think you and I are aligned this. It's basically executive discipline, because happens a lot of time is undisciplined of measuring, undisciplined of reinvesting in these systems. What happens is they come in. I think of like a house. Okay, you're a landlord and you've been maximizing profit. You've been milking every dollar, getting as much as you can, but you spent no money in reinvesting over time, fixing the roof, fixing a thing. Next thing you know, your valuation of the people renting less because it looks crappier, and then you're going, oh crap, and you got to invest, and it's like becomes this incredible expense you got to kind of redo. That's where I feel like I come in sometimes, these
Yes.
restoration systems, marketing, sales things, and I'm like, and they get caught, and they get caught sort of off guard because they didn't invest so long. Their muscle,
Yeah.
the discipline that they had, is so gone that their operations can't catch up with an actual new system.
Yeah.
Does that make
It
sense?
does.
So they're
Yes.
so undisciplined. It's like now I'm giving them a new exercise machine, and there's no way they can lift the weights.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm working with a team. I'm working with a team right now, sales team, incredible sales team, right? Like absolutely one of the best. This one gentleman, he has a little pixie dust. He sprinkles his pixie dust sales come in, like really, really powerful,
Wow. Yeah.
but disastrous on the finance. Disastrous. They can't save a penny. All right. And so when I put together guideposts, I said, look, we're going to put some guideposts in. The very first thing he does, he gets upset. Oh, I need all that money. Well, you really don't. And then when the finance team starts to look at things like, all right, let's look at the lead to close ratio. Let's look at your return on investment, right? Things that you'd want to have established. Sometimes people, and this goes to your muscle analogy. Sometimes people they build such bad disciplines that it's like almost uh, fixing an addiction, right? A spending addiction or a leakage addiction. We have to actually crack that addiction. We have to stop the bad behavior, and then we have to recreate new behaviors, right? And that takes a while. We're
It's
talking.
funny you say that. So usually, sometimes, I mean, you just said it right there. You have to change their mindset. It's amazing how I underestimated when I went in this career path how much of mindset and work I do to get them, like, to get to some of these new thinkings. It's the CEO mindset. Sometimes it's not all these other things. Like I could put a new system in, and everything else could be in place, but if the CEO is actually not, mindset's not on following through and leading it, it doesn't even work.
Yeah, yeah. And look, you want to have optimism. I'm gonna throw this out there. We all. I'm a big fan of optimism. I love like just absolutely. excited C-level suite, because I'm not that guy, right? I'm just not. I'm not built to be that guy. I'm not the gregarious, outward-going type. And so I'm always enamored with that personality. But what I found is that sometimes that personality can be a little detrimental too. Are you familiar? Uh, think back to the dot-com bubble. Remember that?
Hmm.
Remember,
Oh yeah,
remember a company called Commerce One?
kind of.
Yeah. So I'll just remind you, Commerce One was like a competitor to eBay, right? They had a little bit of a different model, but it was an auction. But nonetheless, it was a high flyer. I remember I bought it and I made a lot of money on the stock in the '90s. I thought I was going to, be a billionaire by 25, right? And the company goes from about $400, I think, and don't hold me to it, to about 7 cents after the dot-com bust, and they needed money, and so they came to our firm. We were a private equity firm, and they said well we need about $5 million, right? And I remember having a conversation with the CEO, and I said to the CEO, if the share price drops, right, we get more of your shares. I said, because the way at that point in time, we were lending to, I want to say, real transformational turnaround companies. And it was at 7 cents. And I said to the CEO, if it goes to 3 cents, right, if we give you $5 million, and let's say for $5 million, we own 25% of your business. If it goes to 3 cents, we were going to then have 50% of your business. And he says, there's no way in the world we go to 3 cents. We're going to go to $10. What do you think happened?
What, 3 cents?
It went to 2 cents.
Right.
We took mostly all control of the business, right? And so, what's my point here is that there's so many people that are excited. They have an exciting mindset, and that's why I like when finance people and marketing people come together, because they balance each other out.
Hmm.
If it's done right, it should balance each other out. All right, because that optimism has to be, hey, optimism is good. Just let's talk a little bit about the risk side. Not saying we have to change things, just let's talk about it. Right. And without that, you have companies that I call it entrepreneurs gone wild.
Totally. And you think of one of the questions that comes up often is, what's the return on investment on brand? And that, I think, brand value has to play an important role. You take two shoe companies, one's Nike and one's No Name. There's no comparison. Same if they had the same revenue, same operating costs, and everything. There is a differentiation. But what comes up is what's the return on investment? How would you kind of like have someone really understand how they can value the investment in their brand?
Brand's a tough one, right? It's the one that's not my strong suit. But what we should be thinking about, and brand clearly has some impact here. Um,
Well, think of it, rename it. Just go, what is the reputation of yourself in the
yeah,
marketplace, and your customers' sensitivity to price. It's like they're less sensitive to price because they'd rather pay more for your brand, thereby which you have more profitability. I mean, if you think of the real value of why you build a brand, that's one of the
yeah,
reasons.
yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
but that's certain brands, right? That's like luxury
Yeah.
brands or high end cars, right?
Well,
Yeah,
if I have Chick-fil-A, it's not a high-end brand,
fair
but it's a
enough.
brand. My propensity to buy, like I'm going to buy because I'm committed to because I'm conservative and I want to support that,
Yeah,
restaurant or
yeah,
whatever, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's actually a really, that's like a groundswell. Like I'm actually, because they share my values.
yeah.
Because I knew we were going to segue at some point here on ethics, and I'm
No, that's
going,
beautiful. That's beautiful.
to me, I'm like, brand is sort of like espousing now. Brands are kind of like representing values. Like we're talking about business
Sure.
valuation, but value. Think of Patagonia, right? Like
Yep.
they represent a certain level of value. People are willing to pay so much more for brands that represent their value, that they share their values, and it's like becoming like very much like an increased trend. And a lot of that has to do with ethics. They,
Yeah.
they, they
Yeah.
share their ethics with them.
Oh
And
God.
how does that play into valuation? Because I feel like we're entering this world of like, I think ethics has like a game changing valuation possibility here.
Brilliant, brilliant, brother, brilliant. Listen, let's talk about Patagonia for a moment, if that's okay,
Yeah, yeah.
because one of my favorites. I teach it. I have multiple cases at the university around Patagonia. tell all my students this exact same thing. I said, if you came to me, let's just say I was teaching my historical strategy class, which I used to do, and you came to me, Scott, and you were a student, and you said, Professor Young, I have this idea for a brand. I'm going to create a brand. I'm going to make clothing. I'm going to compete against the Nikes of the world, and I'm going to make mostly outdoor stuff. And I'm going to have my own intellectual property, which, by the way, they do. They have their own research and development lab.
Mhm.
And once I come up with these really interesting research and development initiatives, and they're successful, they're all going to be focused on two things: quality and environmental concern. Right. So you probably know Patagonia is the number one producer of organic cotton in the world. Right. And they developed that intellectual property. Do you know what they did with that? You know what they did with that intellectual property? They gave it to Gap and they gave it to Walmart. Gave it. Here you go. Have it. It's yours. Free. Now, why would somebody do that? Right? This goes to what we call the triple bottom line, if you've ever heard. Does the triple bottom line sound familiar?
Never heard. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah. So the triple bottom line, it's been in the ethics textbooks for years. But normally when I ask you, Scott, what's your bottom line? What comes to mind? Financial bottom line, how much profit you're making. Well, the new brands, the companies that have an ethical mindset, we don't focus just on profits. Profits have to be there, right? So you're sustainable. But we also have two other initiatives. We have environmental sustainability initiative, and then we have a social initiative. And that social initiative is, what am I doing for my employees? What am I doing for society? Am I doing anything whatsoever? Right? What's my quality standards look like in my company? And so this is what I would like for you to think about. Think Patagonia. Patagonia was indeed profitable. But if you asked Yvon Chouinard, who was the founder of Patagonia, did you start this business to make a profit? He would have said, absolutely not. He only realized he needed to make a profit because if he didn't make a profit, people would think he was crazy. That's what he says, right? He says, my main initiative was to save the environment, right? Because they were making early days of Patagonia, they were making clothing, particularly cotton shirts. And what they realized is when they were making those cotton shirts inside of their California location, everybody was getting headaches in the office, serious headaches. And the reason is that shirt had formaldehyde in it, which was literally harming your brain. And so what did he do? He went out and he wanted to see how cotton was made. And he went out into California and he went to some of the cotton farms and he realized that there were people around the outside of these farms that were carrying guns. They weren't carrying guns to keep people out. They were carrying guns to shoot the birds off because if the birds came down and ate the cotton, the birds were going to die. That's how toxic it was, right? And so he said, I'm going to create a shirt. I'm going to create clothing of high quality that could be used for outdoor activity that is going to be non-threatening to the environment, right? So his goal was environmental bottom line, to make the world a better place environmentally, right? While making a profit. So he just hit the two bottom lines. And then third, if you know much about Patagonia, and it sounds like you do, their turnover rate from employees is almost non-existent. Everybody wants to work at Patagonia. Why? Because midday and I'm in California and the surf's up, everybody gets on their surfboards, they go out and they surf for a couple hours. Or they'll play volleyball. It's a very balanced place. They care about their employees. They got great benefit plans. I remember this was years ago now. They had this one particular plan which was interesting. If you got arrested for a civil
Disobedience or something.
disobedience, and it related to something, a value that they cared about, they would actually pay the bill. Right? Now think about that. He also said, I don't want people from business school. I don't need masters in business administration. He says, I want dirtbags. That's what he said.
It's true. He actually, I interviewed Sean Thompson,
Yep.
a world champion surfer, and he worked with him early days,
Yep.
and that's how they got into the surfing direction. Was that? Yeah, and he says you wouldn't believe how many surfers work there. They're like hardcore surf at a crew, right? Like
Awesome, right? So what did Yvon Chouinard do so well? His brand matched his environmental concerns, which matched his his care for his employees, which when you put it all together made lots of profit. But nobody, if you went to business school and you said to your professor, I'm going to make clothing, I'm going to, that's and shirts and shoes and things of the sorts, it's going to be outdoor clothing. Yes, one of my competitors is going to be Nike and all the others. And I'm going to come up with really interesting ideas to save the planet as it relates to environmental destruction. And I'm going to give that intellectual property away for free, right? Oh, you would have failed strategy course. Your professor would have said, "You're out. You're flunked. Fail." Oh, by the way, they don't do any marketing, right? So there's no top line market. Oh, very very little
Very
top line
little.
marketing.
Yeah.
And so you put all this together. There were so many things wrong at Patagonia that I actually believe it turned right. Right?
Well, I mean, one of the things that that made no sense at the time as a differentiator for the brand, they said lifetime warranty. I know of guides, ski guides, that have their jacket that they've had for 20 years, and they've shown me how many times they've mailed it back,
Yes.
and they actually offered them to replace the jacket, and they're like, no chance. There's something about wearing a badge of honor of having a jacket that they then keep stitching and fixing, and they go, and that thing they love it. Like that's how hardcore their audience is.
Yeah.
So that right there is not, most people would say that's a bad investment decision to make it 100% lifetime guarantee. Two, their marketing is counterintuitive in the sense that if you look, they don't market, they don't do any
That's right.
sales on Black Friday. There's a bunch of these things they do that the busiest sales day of the year, they actually don't buy into consumerism. They wanted to go the opposite way. As an investor, you'd be looking at that going, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure. I mean, Yvon Chouinard even says, he said, "I want you to buy less. I want you to buy less, but I want you to buy better." Right? So high quality, the four R's, right? I always forget them. This is the four R's, Patagonia's 4R initiative: reuse, recycle, repair, and
Replenisher.
replenish.
Yeah.
Maybe there's one more, right? But those four R's, when you think about it, that's a high quality product. That is
Mm-hmm.
extremely high quality. So when I'm going to pay 300% more than somebody else's product, and by the way, I know it's going to take care of the environment, and I know it takes care of their employees. Of course, I feel good buying that product.
But
Absolutely.
so I think that that's the trend of businesses, and the valuation is so I'm holding up this case.
Yeah.
I used to buy this case based on price,
Yeah.
but now I want my money to do more. The newer generation is going, well, who made that case? What are you doing with the profits of the company? Um, are you like, is this one sunglass, these glasses, like Tom's, are you actually helping do something for the world to make it a better place? People want their dollar to do more
Yeah.
than the actual what's obvious, the product and stuff. And I think
Yeah.
that's there's this really, I don't know if you know David Ellison. He came up with a book called The End of Demographics. He did a research
Hmm.
study over with basically proving that people buy based on values. That the demographic targeting is just it's so archaically wrong,
Yeah.
and it's such great research because it's not kind of true. The clients and the people are buying more on values. They just don't realize it. Business value and people value, like this whole topic of value
Yeah.
and valuation is at the center of everything.
Yes. Yes. And it can alienate people too, right? So there's portions of that'll market to your base and that'll be solid, and then you're going to alienate others. Who was it just recently? The former CEO of Lululemon. He got
Yeah.
he gets himself in trouble all the time
Mhm.
because he's marketing to the fitness community, right? And I think Lululemon, after he left, they wanted to market to a more diverse population, and they haven't really been successful at that. Um, and I think that's hurting their brand. I think it's hurting their brand seriously. They're saying they
Yeah.
want to do something, but they're not
Chip
doing it.
might actually be on the show. I've been talking with them about getting Chip on the show, on my show.
I hope you do.
Yeah.
I think he's spot on right.
Do you know
Um,
what he did? He just bought West Beach.
okay.
His original brand was West Beach, which is a surf snowboard brand in Canada, and it totally just like evaporated. It was hugely successful. He just bought it back, which is interesting. So Chip Wilson, he's an interesting one. Because in his case, he got punted out because he wasn't being diverse enough. He was being, I think it was like he was making remarks about only athletic women in Lululemon, and that just completely imploded his position on the board. Is that Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that's exactly what he did. But he does it regularly, right? I guess he's been gone for a bit, right, from the
Right.
C suite. But this is what he said recently. He said, "Why do we keep?" And now look, I'm not taking any positions on anything on diversity. This is just his statements. Why would Lululemon market that they care about diversity if in fact they sell clothes to people who are not a diverse set of body types, right? Essentially, they market and sell only to people who go to yoga and go to the gym classes, etc. Right? There's really nothing there for larger people, and so why are we? You see what's happening. We have a little bit of a contradiction. We're saying we care about diversity, but in fact, we're not, and so that's going to create some
It's
real.
incongruent.
Oh, for sure, for
So
sure.
it's like, so when someone does, so the story behind this for me anyways as a brand strategist is the origins of the brand is this. They decided no different than going, hey, we used to burn, gas, and now we're saying we're green. You're greenwashing, and that can be good,
Yeah,
but there's a congruency if you're still actually doing this. It actually doesn't. The marketplace can tell when you're not congruent. He was just saying we were authentically this, and so now Lululemon was trying to become more diverse, which I think is more open-minded to the marketplace. That's a good idea, but their origins were there. They don't. I don't think they crossed the chasm.
right.
Other brands, their origins are being diverse, like a brand I just launched a year and a half ago called Vertica, and it's like their tagline is "Every body belongs," and it's like body diversity, doing fitness workouts.
Yeah.
They're blowing up. Why? They're so authentic to the brand.
Mm.
So it's like I think there's congruency is the word. It's a little bit of like ethics, right?
Yeah.
If you're not congruent with your own values, how do you expect anyone to follow you?
Yeah. And by the way, this goes to the triple bottom line. Your values are wrapped up in the environmental component, and your values are wrapped up in the social component. For all of the almost incredibly, I think it's almost criminal media that Walmart gets. Okay, Walmart has a triple bottom line mentality. And so when you look at Walmart, you pick up its annual reports, you look at the letters from the CEO, you're going to see they talk about three things: profits, environmental issues, and employees. And so Walmart, every year they want to make more profit. They put that profit to work, they build more stores. But secondly, they want to have the majority of their stores on renewable energy. Right? So that's like a major component of their triple bottom line, making sure they're not destroying the environment in the process. Now, how well are they doing? I'll let other people determine that. But they're trying, right? They're being transparent, which clearly has something to do with ethics. Not just saying I want to do it, but showing people that you're actually doing it is very, very important. Right? We're gonna have this initiative. Okay, next year we're gonna have 10 box stores fully renewable. Following year we're gonna have 100. Following year we're gonna have 300. Now tell me, how did you do against those goals? Right? That's what gets people excited. When I think about a brand, it's not just talking the brand, it's actually living the brand and showing people
Mm-hmm.
that you've actually done it right. Patagonia is incredible, right?
Against
Everything they did,
headwinds, I
of
think the test
course.
is when it push comes to shove, what happens. That is the key. If you think of like all the people jumping the bandwagon of, the latest movement, Black Lives Matter, where are they now? They just did it in the moment, and that's what happens a lot of times with these trends of sustainable and
Yeah.
things. They kind of do this, but they're not at their core committed to it. There's no discipline for it. They're not seeing the long game of it. It's not authentic, and they're not being congruent. That's the piece that actually is what trips everybody up. Is they think it's a game, it's a tactic.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
not. It's a business model.
It's a business model. And in the ethics world, we call these virtues. We call them values. We also call them virtues. You have to have a business that has integrity, doing what you're telling me you're going to do when no one else is looking, but making sure, right? Making sure if somebody wanted to know, um, if somebody wanted to know, did you fulfill your goal that you told the world? Show us that you did
I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, so we're talking about virtues. Had a little bit of a pattern interrupt there, guys. So you and I were talking about the power of value of having these virtues for business, and
Yeah, yeah. So in the ethics world, we teach leadership virtues, um, and virtues are pretty much things, actions or behaviors that people have cherished forever, right? And so let me give you a virtue. And some people confuse them with values, though they have some relevance. And I don't want to geek out on you, Scott, for a moment, but I'm just going to bring up a name you probably heard before called Aristotle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Aristotle said a virtue is a behavior that lies between two extreme behaviors. And so I want you to think about this, because this relates to business. Do we like the person? Think about it when you were in college. Did you like the person that you went to a bar was always trying to get into a fight and mix it up with everybody? Like,
Nope.
no one sort of liked that person, right? They were
In
always
fact,
looking.
you always paid attention and going, I know when I'm going to keep my distance.
Yeah, like it was like, oh, come on, pal, we're just looking to have some fun, right? And so no one really liked that person. But on the opposite side, none of us like to spend a lot of time with somebody who won't stand up for themselves either.
Right.
Right? We don't like the out the outrageous violence of the one side, but at the other side, we don't like the sheep either. What do we like? And throughout history, we like courage. We like people who stand up for themselves when it needed to, or stand up for others when needed to, right? That's a virtue. And so when you think about virtues, and like I said to my students, try to write down behaviors that lie between two extremes. And what you're going to find is a list of behaviors that pretty much people throughout history always loved. And it's the same thing about corporations. I think it. There's some integration there, or I should say, there's a bridge from personal and leadership virtues to corporate virtues.
And what would
And
be an
so,
example of a corporate virtue versus value?
corporate virtue is again, because we were talking about Patagonia. Let's keep it there. They stand up, right, for the environment when nobody else was. They were going out of their way to make sure that we weren't killing each other because of environmental degradation. They were trying their best to do that. Virtue. Taking care of your employees, treating them well when you don't have to, right? Like so many companies, they'll treat their employees not so great. Well, what did Patagonia do? They went out of their way. They didn't go to the extreme on either side. They were in the middle. They said, "Look, we still have to get work done here, folks. But surf's up, and you're working in a California office. Hey, go jump out on the surf for an hour or two. Come back, finish your work, make sure you get it done, pick up the hours at the end of the night." Right? And look, I'm not saying everybody should be able to do that. Work patterns permitting. Patagonia, they had that luxury and they took advantage of it. So those are virtues. How do you take care of your employees? Are you treating them with respect, or are you treating them, you know, like without any dignity, right? Or maybe what you're doing is just the opposite. You're giving your CEO 1,000 times the pay of the average employee, right? Is that virtuous? I'll let somebody else think about that one for a bit. But virtues transcend corporations. Some people call them values. I'm going to say that they're virtues.
Interesting. So virtue versus value. Virtue is something that exists in between two extremes. That is we may have a value, like I value, being um, you know, uh, uh, you know, fair and equitable, but my virtue is I do it when no one's looking. It's an actual action or something. It's an actual
Yeah,
am I kind of getting that my hand inside or
I think a virtue is an action. A value is a thing,
right?
right?
So a virtue is actually something that is like we don't. It's not something we say we are. It's something that we actually embody. But people would say, well, isn't
Yes.
values something you're supposed to follow through on? You know what I mean? Like I'm supposed to be kind, considerate if those are values.
Yeah. Let's assume that you value freedom.
Hmm.
Well, in order for freedom to have a real value, and other than just words, your virtues have to match that. Meaning, will you fight for that freedom? What will you do to ensure that freedom is secure? Right. So the actions, the virtue needs to map to the value. There
Mm.
has to be some relationship between the two.
So virtues are like the underpinnings of your values. Then they become vacuous unless you're willing to back it up with virtuous behavior.
Yeah, virtue. Yes, in order to prove values, you got to have virtues. That's my belief.
Whoa, that's this that that's say that again.
In order to have values, you have to have virtues.
Interesting. That is a very interesting. I never thought this is where this would land on. But I think I remember we were talking about this when we first sat down, and that's what was like really peaked on that is the 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 ethics of a business. How does that then go back to the beginning of the discussion of like again the valuation?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm a virtuous company, how could I value that more or get a buyer value that more versus that's actually eating the bottom line. I'm going to give you a discount as
Yeah.
you described it.
Yeah. I think Patagonia, just because we keep using that one, and let's continue with it. Why do they get 2, 3, maybe sometimes 400% more per garment than uh, everybody else? Well, yes, there's quality. We already acknowledged that, but it has something to do with brand, right? And the environment where they put their money, where their virtues and their values line up, right, is protecting, which is the virtue. Environment is the value, right? So when they put all of that together, when they care about employees and they actually then go ahead and act on caring about employees, to me, that's what we're talking about here. That's how we build brand. That drives extra revenue, which clearly drives profits.
Slow clapping. That's exactly what I think. That's the two levers: the business performance and the brand value.
Yeah,
Right? It
no
it
question.
really is. It really is because it's the reputation. It's the wrapper of all the things that you promise to do, say to do, deliver and do, and create the experience around that in a predictable way.
Yeah. The only problem with that is we're talking about a mature company.
Right.
When Patagonia was early stage and they were doing what they were doing, most people were probably looking at them as bad business person, has no idea what he's
It was more
doing.
like a craft brand because at that point, there when you're a craft brand, that's their or a disruptor brand. They're one of the two.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yes, yes. And so from my position, I hear people talking about brand and let's invest in the brand, and that's great. But in the beginning, you're probably not going to see a tremendous uptick in price. It's going to take a while.
Hmm.
And I don't know what that while is. I'll leave that up to you smart marketing people. But at some point, that brand goes from, maybe it's binary. I don't know. Doesn't matter to it matters. And I don't
Right.
know. I don't know when that happens.
I look at it in four different categories. It's like you're either a craft brand, a disruptor brand, a challenger brand, or the leader brand.
Hmm.
And where you are in there, it really as the sort of the constitution of your brand and what you do and how you need to be valued. It depends on where you are in those fitted areas, right?
Mm.
And so Patagonia is now they were a craft brand that's now a leader brand.
They're definitely a leader brand. Yeah.
They were disruptor mostly, and there's no challenger. Now there's all the challenger brands, North Face and stuff. They're challenger brands technically to I would say Patagonia to a greater extent, right?
Yeah,
There's a
probably.
ton of them. North Face, whatever, a variety of them that.
There's. Are you familiar with Veja sneakers?
Mm-hmm.
So Veja's got a very similar. I'm not sure if you dug into them, but they have a very similar pedigree to Patagonia. Different business model, but just an incredible story. Care about the environment. They're sneakerheads. They didn't want to. They didn't want to continually make sneakers and rubber from manufactured oils, and so they opened up in the Amazon, and they tapped rubber from the rubber trees.
Okay.
Right? They make all the rubber on those sneakers from the rubber trees, 100% environmentally friendly. Right? Then they hired the people in the Amazon to produce the shoes. These are people with limited to no education whatsoever.
So okay, so the Von Dutch, but we're talking about brands. So Von
Yeah.
Dutch was a brand that used to be a core brand,
Uh-huh.
massive following, and then and they were really they shared the values of the surf community, and then they started working with influencers like Paris Hilton. And at the time, it took the brand visibility and all that was looking like it blown up, and they probably could have sold it at a credible value. But
Yeah.
what it did was it imploded the brand
Yep.
because it wasn't actually congruent values. They totally got off their game. They were disconnecting from the values that they started the brand with. And I see this all the time. It's like they whatever built them, whatever got them there.
Yep.
Sometimes they leave it and they kind of chase what they're kind of going after something that's going to make it bigger, better. But they don't realize that if you patiently keep growing with what you got, you would have had a better valuation.
Yes. Sometimes.
Yeah, not all the time, of course, but yeah, that's
Yeah. Let's bring some of these pieces back, right? You have marketing. We had talked about finance.
Hmm.
And finance and marketing without ethics, neither one of those are going to operate correctly either. You're going to take advantage of clients on the marketing side. Your message is going to be distorted. On the finance side, you're probably going to do things such as overbill, be aggressive collectors, not give discounts when needed, right? So ethics is a wrapper. I look at ethics as a wrapper for an entire business. Without ethics, you're probably going to be a short-lived company.
So say you have like ethics, and I'm just going to I know we're wrapping here a little bit, but we have ethics, and then your virtue is to be compassionate, for example. And so
Yep.
as being compassionate is, hey, you have suppliers that are, or you have accounts receivable that you're compassionately not pressing people to pay, but it's affecting your cash flow. I mean, at what point, like which one lives first? Like the sort of Patagonia, it's like
Yeah.
riding the line a little bit, right?
Yeah, it is. I think first you have to say sustainability is the most important.
Yeah.
You have to live for another day, so you have to make profits. And so, if not collecting your accounts receivable is not going to make you is going to take you from a profitable to a non-profitable organization, I would have to say, you have to push for those collections. The only way I would give up collections is not if somebody can't pay. If somebody said, Scott, product wasn't what I desired it to be, really bad product, you give them a credit, or you consider giving them a credit. But if somebody calls you and says, "Oh, sir, I'm sorry, I just can't pay the bill," well, it doesn't mean you give them a freebie. It says, "Okay, maybe we'll work through some kind of plan for you." Right? It
Hmm.
doesn't mean you give them a freebie. That's a whole deeper conversation around ethics. But ethics is, like I said, I started out in economics. I care still today. I care deeply about how we make economic and rational decisions. And that's on marketing side, that's on the finance side, that's on the accounting side, et cetera. But what I've realized over time is that we were training everybody in the marketplace to make really strong economic decisions, and we weren't training them to make ethical decisions. Right. And that's, by the way, that's been going back since the early 20th century. For years, we were teaching people, business students, how to make incredibly sound economic decisions, but we threw ethics to the back burner because we couldn't really see it, touch it, feel it. Right? It's kind of got like a God piece to it, and maybe a little bit stuff we weren't comfortable with. And so, at least that's the way some people look at the world. But only since about the 1970s or so, ethics started to come back into the curriculum. And without thinking about ethics and economics together, when I say economics, I'm talking about just general business decision making. If they're not married, if they don't come back to the altar and marry, my view, capitalism won't be here in 50 years.
It's not sustainable. That's why I wrote
Not
about my
sustainable.
book. It's like you can't, like the long and the short of research that was done over 30 years of brands
Yeah.
is it shows that bottom line short term thinking cash flow and brand building over time. You could argue that that's ethics, your brand,
Yeah.
over time can overtake individual short term sales. But I've argued that's not sustainable. You need to do both.
You need
That's
to
what
do
you're
both.
talking. You need to do both. Like I think it's so like people are so far on the brand side of like and not thinking about sales. They're not understanding cash flow. They're understanding that there needs to be like a regurgitation of like innovation and understanding of that sort of. You can't rely completely on brand. There's many companies that have gone out of business
Yep.
believing only in their brand, not in actually understanding cash flow intelligence, if you want to call it that.
Yes. 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 And yes. And again, that's why I bring back to that triple bottom line. That helps balance you. We got to track financial profits. We got to track values. We could put the other two into values. But if you're not tracking it, you can't tell what you're doing right, and you can't tell what you're doing wrong. And ultimately, one of two things are going to happen: you're going to go out of business, or people are going to hate your company.
So to recap on the three bottom lines, what are they in the? It's like if you give them three words, there's
Profit,
yep,
environmentalism, social.
got it. That is incredible. Like, I thank you so much for being on the show. That's like you getting such a master class in a matter of an hour and 15 minutes on covering so much
I,
topic and stuff. So this was great. I really appreciate you. I've gotten to know you over the last, like we had a mastermind together for a year and
yeah,
I became, it's so respected your point of view and I've just enjoyed listening to you navigate some of these issues. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, and Scott, I appreciate it. I think I told you, and as you know, I was a client of yours, or still am a client, still a learner of yours. I read your book. You have a tremendous amount to offer to society. Tremendous. I think your book is wonderful. I can't wait to read the second book. But anybody that's listening to this podcast, you are without question way ahead of the pack, my friend.
Oh, dude.
Way ahead of the pack. So keep it
Humbled.
up. I'm sure everybody is going to be flocking to your doors if they aren't already to figure out how to build an ethical and a financially viable company.
Love it. Thank you. I'm very honored. So where can they find you so they can follow you?
Yeah, so you can find me at Chris Young at LinkedIn, or you can email me at Chris. Take that back. C Young at resecon.com. C like Chris Young at resecon.com.
And if you want me to put it, I'll put it in the show notes so that you can just click on it.
Sounds good, buddy.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening. That's another episode of the Groundswell Origins podcast. As usual, just click on groundswell.fm, go to the mic, send me a voicemail, let me know what you loved, what you didn't like, what you want to see more of. Even leave a note what you think of this episode. And join us at the Groundswell Inner Circle if you want to join the community of people that want to create sustainable growth. Join other founders, other maverick marketers, and soulpreneurs. And until next time, mahalo.